Join us for an interview with Fred Dixon, co-founder of BigBlueButton, the world's most adopted open-source virtual classroom application whose mission is to democratize education for students in every corner of the globe. So tune in. You might learn something.
And I learned one thing in taking karate, that if you want to learn karate quickly and purposefully, you spar with the black belt. You're in front of that the head of the class, and you spend as much time with them as you can. And you may go home a bit bruised and sore and beaten up, but you feel great because you're just learning so much. So I could not learn what I needed to just staying at my job. I had to start a company. I had to go out.
Okay, let's get into this. Education as we know it has been the same for hundreds of years. There's a teacher, a group of students, and the teaching, such as it is done face-to-face in a classroom. However, as we live more and more of our lives with and through technology, it's not surprising to see that conventional teaching methods are being challenged. But things haven't moved quickly, until that is March 2020, when the paradigm of education was forever changed by COVID for everyone, everywhere, causing a massive quake among educators, parents, and students. In the space of weeks, the entire world was flipped upside down and replaced with one that was unrecognizable. According to UNICEF, April 2020 saw school closures across 188 countries, with most scrambling to find ways to provide continuous education using technologies such as the internet, TV, and even radio. What the world came to realize was that access to technologies that many of us consider every day was and continues to be limited in many low and middle income countries, especially among poor households. To paint a picture, 463 million students globally can't be reached by broadcast and internet-based remote learning technology, either due to the lack of necessary technological assets at home or because they simply weren't targeted by the adopted policies. With mere days to transition, teachers were forced to adopt clunky and not fit-for-purpose video conferencing tools to continue teaching their students. The problem? These tools were designed for the boardroom, not the classroom. This week's featured guest, Fred Dixon, is the co-founder of BigBlueButton, an open-source virtual classroom application created in university by teachers for teachers. An application that, through 2.5 years of COVID, has helped deliver more than 3 billion minutes of teaching for more than 1 million educators in 55 languages. In this interview, Fred will discuss his experience of starting a company for the first time, how he came to co-create BigBlueButton and began Blindside Networks, the team that administers and services the app, and why he bet on open source and creating a free product that he believed would one day change the world. Now over to the fabulous Fred. Hey everybody, this is Robert Hawking, and I would like to welcome our guest today, my good friend, longtime friend, and a serial entrepreneur, Fred Dixon, who is the CEO and founder of Blindside Networks, and also the co-creator of BigBlueButton, the world's largest open source virtual classroom application. And Fred, I've known for more than 25 through different entrepreneurial ventures, and so pleased to welcome you today. Fred, thanks for making some time.
My pleasure, Robert. Glad to be here.
So Fred, let's start. You've got a technology background, and for a lot of people who have an interest in tech, naturally, they're not necessarily thinking about just getting a job somewhere. They're thinking about how they might be able to turn that into a venture. Why don't you start way back in the mists of time and talk to us about, what you studied, where you worked, and what was the genesis for you deciding to become an entrepreneur?
So I have a mathematics degree. This was at University of Waterloo before they did computer science, and I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I gave myself 3 years after I graduated from university to start my own company. And I ended up starting in four years. And that was around 1995. But it was a really good time to start a company because the internet was going gangbusters. Like this is the era of, Netscape and Hotmail and all these things were starting up. So I had some ideas about, at that time, a company for doing web-based data analysis. And I raised some venture capital, which eventually raised to about $13.5 million of VC funding, and built a company up. There was about 65 people at the peak. We brought in an outside CEO because I wore a younger man's clothes back then. And I learned a lot, and it was a great ride, and it was eventually sold. And from that, I learned that this is the only thing I want to do in my life, which is try to, create something that has value to people, but more so than just generate revenue. I have a strong desire to create something that has a social benefit to other people around the world. So those two drivers made it that I would always focus on trying to build a company. And this is actually my third company. So I've been at it for a little while.
Now, it's interesting, somebody that comes from a mathematical background where, it's formulaic, and going into the entrepreneurial world doesn't seem like an easy or natural connection. So how did you know, did you come from an entrepreneurial background? Where was the dream born? Because it certainly wasn't because you'd gone to business school, quite the opposite. So how did you decide so early on that this was a move for you?
So I think it has to do with my personality. I would say I'm somewhat introverted. And as an introvert, you tend to do things, yourself. And so the biggest way to do things at scale and have a lot of control over it is to start a company. So I had worked at a number of companies. I learned a ton, but I really wanted to have that chance to build a company from scratch. And like most entrepreneurs at the time, if I could talk to my younger self, I would say, you did the right thing. There would be different ways to do it that would be a bit easier. But it was a combination of I thought I could do it, and I was too naive to know how difficult it was. So I learned a lot along the way, and I benefited from some good mentors. And because I had a technical background, I was able to attract other technical people. And that's how a lot of the high-tech companies start. It's usually a core group of engineers who create something, proof of concept, get some first customers. And the experience I had in my first company, which grew quite a lot, and I had a chance to work with some people in sales and marketing, I learned a lot from them. And I think the thing I learned in terms of building the company was a solution-based approach to selling, which is not, hey, I'm selling you a used car, would you like to buy it? It's like, I want to understand the problem you have. I want to hear what your ideal solution would be. And I want to try to align what I have to enable you to implement your ideal solution. And in that way, whatever we create is an enabler. And as long as we have really good alignment, and there's a market need, and the market's growing, and we be able to differentiate ourselves, all those good things. But the nuts and bolts of it come down to being able to find a market, convince people in the market that you can enable them to implement the solution that they're looking for, and then be really persistent in terms of building that solution. You hear things about, let's do a hack weekend and we'll start up a company and we'll throw some prototypes together and we'll code for 48 hours and we'll have a proof of concept. Sure, yes, maybe, possibly. Very unlikely. The reality of it is you have to be persistent in a market, and you don't have to know a market per se, it helps, but you have to have a really good idea of how to approach the problem and provide a solution. And that's just talking to lots of people, listening to lots of people. So I think I said earlier that I was introverted. In some ways, yes, but I'm very comfortable speaking in front of people. When I speak about what we're trying to do, I feel passionate about it. I know what we're doing. I know how the value of it is. And I guess one other thing with starting a company is you get to work with other smart people. People who start companies and are successful are not dumb. Not that I needed any sort of validation, but it's nice to know that the work that you're doing, and as you grow a company, you get to typically work for really smart people. And we're going to get into this in a little bit, I presume, but the basis of our company is open source technology. So we do virtual classroom built on open source, and our focus is to make the most teacher-centric virtual classroom in the world. So we focus on one market. I learned that from my first company as well. And in doing so, the people who are orbiting around open source projects and working on them and contributing to them, these are highly motivated, very smart people. And I've had the pleasure to work with some really smart people around the world. in building out the BigBlueButton project. And, again, it's not an overnight effort, right? There's no 48 hours here. We've been at this for 13 years, and it still feels like we're a company growing. But in that time frame, I've managed to make connections with people all around the world, build some really deep relationships with some incredibly smart people who I admire a lot. And we all work very hard together to continue to improve our project over and over, version after version. And what that means is it just gets better and better for our target market with each release.
Right. So I'm curious about that first experience. I mean, it's funny because you and I were both early on in ventures when we met, and for me, it doesn't feel that long ago, but in real terms, it's 25 years. I mean, think about what's changed in 25 years, everything. So I'm just curious, what a lot of the people that might be watching this interview are going to be people that are contemplating a venture. Having gone through that experience, I mean, I know because I know you, I know that it wasn't always an easy experience. When you look back on that first venture, what were the big things that you took away from that? The biggest lessons that you learned that shaped your approach to developing your next business? You commented a little bit about solution selling, having dedicated focus, et cetera. But what are some of the other lessons that you learned through that experience? Because, of course, you conceptualized the business, you brought in partners, you found investors. 25 years ago, raised $13 million. I mean, $13 million is a decent raise now. Back then, it was incredible. Like, you were doing this all for the first time. So, that was an amazing learning experience. What were the big lessons that you took away from that?
Right. So there's sort of the first company I had, which I raised 13 million. I did a second company, which raised zero money and made close to zero money. But that was during the dot-com bust. But I was hell-bent to start all over again because I didn't want to be idle. I wanted to take another shot at it. I learned a lot. That second company didn't be successful. I spent a stint as a VP of sales at a third company. And this is my fourth company, Blindside Networks, the third of which I co-founded. And so there's really two answers to that question. There's what was Fred like 25 years ago when I didn't really know much, full of energy, and what was it like to start that fourth company? And I think the better answer might be looking at that fourth company, because you have a bigger pedestal on which to stand upon now in terms of access to information. There's lots of success stories. There's Y Combinator. There's lots of roadmaps out there for the nuts and bolts of starting a company. That part there's commonality amongst it. If you think about what differentiates an entrepreneur, one who succeeds and one who perhaps doesn't, there's a couple factors. I would have to say there's a sense that you are going to make it, and that you have this inner drive to overcome obstacles, and there will be a lot along the way. But I listened to Simon Singh on a podcast recently, and he gave an example of he's at a conference, and there's a group of people offering free bagels. And it's a busy conference, and so there's a lineup, and there's these tables, and there's all these bagels that are there, and people are making bagels up, but there's a lineup. So he goes to his friend and says, "Hey, let's go get some free bagels." And his friend looks at the line and says, "The lineup's too long." And Simon Singh says, "Free bagels." And his friend goes, "No, it's too long of a line." And the analogy is, are you focused on this goal, or are you looking at the obstacles along the way? Because if you look at the obstacles, there's no bagels, right? You're not getting the bagels. So I think one thing for starting a company, if I was to say to other entrepreneurs, and not to discount any of the well-trodden advice that other people would give, is you really gotta want the bagel. Like, you are thinking about the bagel, what is it going to taste like? And I don't care how long the line is, because the length of the line doesn't matter, notwithstanding you run out of food or water or shelter or anything. If it's going to take you 6 months to build a product for a market that you believe you can provide a solution, that's the obstacle. That's the line. But at the end of that, you get a shot, right? And maybe entrepreneurism is a little like partial reinforcement. we're in the Skinner box, we're pecking the lever, and every now and then some food drops down. It's like, man, if I just keep pecking this lever, more food's going to drop down. So to put into concrete terms, this company, that Blindside Networks, it develops virtual classroom systems. So how did it start is I was networking around Carleton University, and I was looking for other students to mentor because I had gotten a lot of mentorship in the past. That's my earlier self from my first company when I didn't know much. A lot of people helped me out along the way, and I kind of felt like I could pass on some knowledge to others and get some satisfaction from it. And so they showed me a couple of projects that were going on in the university, and there was this one that had been built out, a web conferencing system based on open source technology, and it had undergone about a year of development, and it was in use at Carleton in the Technology Innovation Management program. And I met the person who wrote it, really great guy, and I talked to some of the professors, and they were like, hey, this is great. And they were teaching engineers how to be entrepreneurs, and they said, hey, if you want to start a company around this, we can't give you money, but we'll be your first customer. And to me, that was the light, because there is a huge difference between 0 customers and 1 customer. And I felt like if I had 1 customer that I could work with and rev this and improve it, and then I look at there's 4,500 degree-granting institutions in North America, there's many more around the world, and then I just ask myself, is the internet getting faster? Are the browsers getting better? Are computers getting faster? Is it likely that there will be more education delivered online in the future? There was yes to all 4 of those. And the software that eventually my co-founder, Richard Alam, wrote was building on some pieces that were just becoming available as open source that were enough to put together a web conferencing system that the teacher could upload slides, talk to students, chat, share webcams. Like the pieces were there. And I thought, okay, we'll do this. Let's go for it. And so what I said to Richard was this. I can't tell if this is going to be successful, Richard. But I can tell that if you and I spend 2 years full-time working on this, then we will know at the end of that 2 years whether we'll be successful or not. I'm willing to go for it. Are you? And he said yes. So we set it up so that each of us would have 2 years full-on investment in this. And some good things happened along the way. We got another. Go ahead.
Let me just stop you there for a second. I do want to go back to that experience of when you had your first company, because you are a very different kind of entrepreneur from a lot of the entrepreneurs that I meet. You certainly, some of the qualities that you have that are consistent with a lot of the people I meet is, you're very driven. You're quite single-minded. I find that you really adapt well to the challenges in the decision-making process, which is in a constant state of flux when you are running a business. But I know as well that the different parts of you as an entrepreneur you tend to be very, very laid back. One of the things I've always seen about you is money is not even a consideration. And, in terms of what drives you and what gets you out of bed. Now, the reality is a lot of the entrepreneurs I meet are, really about self-actualizing through business. I've met very few that say it's about the money. But I want to go back to that first experience, because that was your first taste of being in business. And at the time, your first venture felt very traditional in its structure. But coming out of that, something seemed to shift in you. You seemed to want to play the game by a different set of rules. That's certainly my impression of you. And I'm curious if that's the case. And if that's the case, what was it that kind of, from that first experience, changed your approach and your thinking to entrepreneurship?
It's a good question. So I think for any person trying to reach a goal, you could kind of look at 2 motivations. You're either repelled away from something or you're pulled towards something. So the analogy might be, I look at someone who's been a developer for 30 years and say, I don't think that's for me. I want something different. What that different may be, I'm not quite sure yet. So for being an entrepreneur in my first company, I really didn't want a career in a larger company. That's where I was essentially at, in a company called Bell Northern Research, which was a great company, but unfortunately is no longer around. And so I got lots of experience there, but I didn't want to stay there. I wanted to start a company. And I felt like the time to do it is when you're young and lots of energy and there are opportunities, and the internet had just happened, right? So I remember using the browser, Netscape Navigator and Spyglass and other browsers at university in 1992. And then I left to have a full-time job. And by the fall of 1995, I had left and started a company. But in those years, like the internet just blew up. Like Netscape went public and it was worth so much. So there was an opportunity. The timing was right. And I believed it was worth, going for it, because I could always get a job. I just wouldn't be able to do the thing I wanted to do. So, the other analogy I have in my life that's kind of is I took karate for many years. And I learned one thing in taking karate, that if you want to learn karate quickly and purposefully, you spar with the black belt. You're in front of that, the head of the class, and you spend as much time with them as you can. And you may go home a bit bruised and sore and beaten up, but you feel great because you're just learning so much. So I could not learn what I needed to just staying at my job. I had to start a company. I had to go out. So that first company, I was kind of repelled away from this idea of what, other career paths are or could have been. By the time I got to my fourth company that I worked at, the third one I started, I was pulled towards something. I knew I could start a company. It was now, what is that company going to be? And I think I got lucky in terms of finding this project, which again had been in development for a year, in a market that I cared a lot about. I had a university degree. We all went through school, and there was a social benefit to what I could do. And so access to education is key to raising families, communities, countries out of poverty. We grew up in a very privileged society in that there was a school down the street. We had the option of going to university. We didn't have to fear going down the road. We had food, eat. It was none of us were, I know you, Robert, neither of us grew up with any great means, but we did pretty well. Part of that is the society we live in, and that we were very lucky to grow up where we were. I know that a lot of people around the world don't have that opportunity, but the key to have opportunity is education. So I felt that if we were successful, there would be two measurements for success. One is, could we build an open source virtual classroom that enabled people around the world to raise themselves out of poverty or to build a better life? And that meant maybe there's a school in Jakarta or India or Pakistan or South Africa that found our software and were able to provide their students who couldn't make it to class access to class and let the students complete their education. So that there's no money there. That is pure social benefit and satisfaction of making the world a better place. I think of it like this. We have one life. What lever can we pull on that will affect the other people's lives around us? I always believe that there's really only one goal in life, and that's make the world a better place. Because by raising up the world, I raise myself up. And I know maybe it sounds corny, but when you know that what you're working on is helping other people around the world, past a certain point of financial stability, that's the real value. That's the real reward, which I think is why a lot of entrepreneurs become philanthropists, right? They've made their money. They just don't know what to do with it. So they start giving it away. Well, I think this project, by one measure, can be how much can we enable people around the world to have access to an online learning. And the other measurement, of course, is the success of the company itself.
So I'm curious about something you just said. I interviewed somebody recently, and they advocated pushing the money to the background. They said that through the trials and tribulations of being an entrepreneur running a business, the thing that's going to keep you on track is the belief in what you're doing. And I think what you're hinting at there is so important. I can relate to it. But I'm curious if you can tell me just, it would be easy, as you say, you could get a job, right? So what's the difference in your experience? Or what was it in you maybe, or what have you seen that was the difference between those who would choose to stay working for someone else versus someone who would get up and enter the arena and start a business themselves.
Right. So I would ask them, how bad do you want that black belt? Or any analogy in any sport, right? How bad do you want to master some craft or some skill or some sport? And it's not about winning, it's about mastering it, right? The winning is the byproduct of the mastery. And at the end of the day, an entrepreneur doesn't care. Well, I personally, winning is defined as, am I mastering something? A very common phrase in entrepreneurs is if your company fails, you just declare success and move on. You just start all over again, right? If you have a match with take karate example again, and you don't win the match, that's okay. You've learned a lot, right? Those scars, those bruises help because you learn and you start again and again and again. And it does take a lot of effort, but no, I was much more interested in being a successful entrepreneur than I think I was anything else. And my experience in martial arts told me, you just keep trying and you will, it takes 4 years or so to get a black belt. You just keep trying. And I picked something that, for me as a developer and as someone introverted, I think in the past, I knew that the best way to become more outgoing and become more successful is do things that are going to challenge you. So entrepreneurism was a means for me to push myself further with, very little chance of failure. Again, it's how you define failure, right? I could have started 3 companies. None of them would have been successful. I could have gone on and get a job anytime I want. And I would still look back and say, I'm glad I did that instead of maybe just staying at a job. That's not for everybody. And that's not, you don't do it just because that's you don't, like I say, you don't want to just keep pushing yourself. And there's really no potential for success. But I'm very fortunate that, we live in a society where entrepreneurism is celebrated. There was lots of entrepreneurial opportunities back in 1995, back in 2007, back today. And I guess the thing you realize over time is that it's a lot of little things that add up with some really key values. Because I think you're kind of hinting at, if you don't have value, if you don't have a reason why you're doing something, it's easy to stop or it's easy to get waylaid. And I really want this project to be successful, and it has been. And when I say this project, there's actually 2 things at play. There's the open source project, BigBlueButton, which we started 13 years ago. And it's in use all around the world, localized in 55 languages. And then there is the legal company, Blindside Networks, which I started with my co-founder to provide the means for universities and colleges to deliver their classes online. And we believe strongly that education is key to the future, to enable people to have an online education of high quality. We built this software, BigBlueButton, and we provide the means for universities around the world to do it and generate revenue from that. And that revenue goes back into improving BigBlueButton. And as an open source project, we have people all around the world that work on it. And that's the fun part. That's the part where, you find out that in Baden-Württemberg, a state in Germany, that they had set up 4,000 BigBlueButton servers to service 3,000 schools. And they would peak at times with 185,000 concurrent teachers and students. And I didn't know about that. They built that with the pieces of software that we created. So what does entrepreneurism mean? Yes, there's probably some financial benefit if you're successful, but you can't replace those experiences where you find something that you did, which you hoped would improve people's lives around the world and enable something they may not be able to do, actually turned out to be the case.
It's funny, just to go slightly off tangent, a good friend of ours is a fine artist, and she's an American living in the UK. And she was called up for jury duty. And now her whole existence has been in the fine art community. She's a professor of fine art. She has exhibited her work all over the world, sells work, is commissioned to do work, but she occupies such a different world than the business world. And she described, she was on this jury for about 8 months. She was taking the subway from where she lived to the courts, and every day she'd come up out of the subway station, and she said, I just couldn't believe it. Like, all of these people in suits, men, women, looking gray, marching off like ants and going into these office towers. She said, I thought, there's no joy in them. And it's so, it's so interesting hearing, you describe and knowing again, I'm fortunate to know some of your backstory. But for me, the idea of entrepreneurship was the fact that there was an empty room in front of me when I started my first venture. And I wanted to fill that with experiences. And I wanted to be able to look back in my life and feel like I'd done everything I could. And honestly, so many sleepless nights that you have as an entrepreneur, you can relate to this. So much uncertainty, success and failures. There is no certainty really in being an entrepreneur. But the one thing you do earn at the end of it all is a rich experience from it. And so the contrast of not having to get up and march off with my suit into that office building, hearing my friend describe it, has been worth it all. From my perspective. I'm curious though, with your business, you deliberately decided to challenge the conventions of how you created the software product. Instead of just creating a product like most do, you actually decided you were going to bet on the open source platform. I'm curious about that. Why did you choose that route? And what was the benefit that you felt that you'd gain through that?
So you're going to laugh. At my first company, we raised $13.5 million. A lot of that money went towards marketing. And it was like, this is really expensive. Now it was a different time. And my thinking was, well, what if we just had poured that money back into making the product better? Well, the problem is you still need to be known in the world, right? Nobody knows about you. They're not going to use you. So one benefit of open source is that if you create a successful open source project, you create a multiplier effect where other people start to use it. They start to build upon it. They tweet about it. They blog about it. They write about it. And most importantly, they use it. And in that usage, you get potential customers. You get people who are maybe advocates of your product, which share it with other people. You get companies who may want to improve it and contribute back those improvements. And you get customers who may just pay you to improve it. And that's what happened in the early days with us. The bet was that if we created something that other people wanted to use, if it scratched the niche, then even though it was probably fairly simple back then by today's comparison, it enabled people to look at it and say, look, I want that, but I was initially planning to build it, but you guys have already built 80% of what I want. It's going to be cheaper for me to just get you to do the last 20%, and then I can just use the software and go off and build my business. And that happened over and over again. So we would get paid to improve the product. The product's great, but it needs this feature, or, this part isn't working for me. Can you fix it? And so we were able to create awareness of our product. We were able to create a commonwealth around it where it was in other companies' interest. It was in other developers' interest or the university's interest to improve the product because those improvements went back in the core and then therefore got improvement. It was in a commercial interest of a company to say, look, I'll pay you to do this. And we were always very clear, whatever money we take, that work that we do goes back into the open source. And a lot of people would come to you and say, I want you to do this project, and it's going to be work for hire. And that's the term that says, I own everything I pay you to do. I pay you $1 and I own what you do. And we just never signed that. We said, nope, everything that's in the project that you like was built by and paid for by companies that gave it freely away, and you benefit from it. We've never done proprietary work. We're not going to start now. So if you want it, it's going to go in the open source and everybody else will benefit from it. But the advantage to you is that other people may improve this piece that you need, and you are less burdened of building on top of it. And the open source model was well known. Linux is the epitome of open source. And so that piece of software is pretty much powering the internet right now. And there's no one company that could ever duplicate what Linux does. It was a community effort. It's the extreme example, but the more mainstream example for projects that are successful, we could take something like WordPress, which powers probably 40% of the internet. It's an open source content management system. It just started off as a pet project. We could take Moodle, the world's most popular learning management system. Martin Duguiamas 15 years ago was frustrated with the current LMS. It was expensive. It was not really well designed. He sat and just started writing his own. One guy started writing it. And over a couple of years, more people came around it. And now that piece of software powers over 50% of the schools and colleges around the world. And it is still open source. And they've built a very successful business around it. And I'll share, as you know, we've been working closely with Moodle, because Moodle as a learning management system is not real time. It's where you go in and check your assignments, upload your assignments, maybe write some posts. You instructor will put up a syllabus. You get marked on your assignments. The grades are in there. Like it's meant to facilitate your courseware. And every school today has an LMS. And so there are a number of major LMSs in the worldwide. The world is Moodle. And so we had an integration with Moodle for 7 years. And recently, Moodle is, in its new release 4.0, is building our integration into the core of Moodle. So it means they are picking one product to be the default virtual classroom in their open source project used by over 50% of people around the world. And that's BigBlueButton. That's the BigBlueButton integration. So amazing. I've come to know, I have to say, like, I've come to get to know Martin. And this goes back to my earlier point. You get to know really smart people. Like, these are entrepreneurs that, by their own right, you see a reflection in yourself and you say, yeah, we did this by open source. We didn't accept any money along the way. Now, they've raised some money recently to help them grow, and we were successful. And that model is something that a commercial company cannot beat. You at the end of the day, you are selling proprietary software. Your customers will not get access to the source code. They will not be able, in most cases, they won't be able to run it locally. They have very little agency to improve it. And they know that, they're paying you, and sometimes they're giving their data to you. In an open source project, a school, like in Germany, for example, can set up their own Moodle server, their own BigBlueButton server, and through digital sovereignty, have all of that data local. And if they want any improvements, they can go back to Moodle or back to Blindside Networks, and we will happily improve the software for them. Because if you can do it for one university, you can do it for 10,000. There's an Art of War quote there, I think, I just stumbled upon. But yeah,
well, listen, I'm interested in delving a little bit into the history of the company. I remember you telling me the fact that the product came out of university, so it was coming from an honest place. That at the time, as you said, internet speeds were increasing. There was lots of video conferencing solutions out there, but there wasn't a lot of virtual classrooms specifically dedicated to teachers. Now, obviously, over the last number of 12 years, you've seen slow and steady growth. But in March of 2020, the world completely changed. And interestingly, the reason that this conversation exists is because over the last 18 months, people are used to having conversations like this through this kind of medium, that they're willing to watch interviews through this kind of medium. And I'm curious, so talk to us about where you were at in March of 2020 and what happened to the business.
Right. So we were growing organically. We have not raised any money. We have just built up this community around the world. And for the first 11 years, it was organic growth. We had hundreds of customers around the world, and we were doing very well. And it was all around offering and building out BigBlueButton. And so let's go back to February of 2020. And in China, things were shutting down. And we had a customer in China at the time, and they were like, we've got to go online now. So we helped them do it because they were using Moodle, and we provided them some pieces to create a scalable infrastructure for BigBlueButton. It's a project we called Scale Light, of which initially enabled that 4,000 server deployment in Baden-Württemberg. But we were working with them, and I was looking at what was going on in North America, and I was like, this is going to all happen here. There's no way we're going to be insulated from it. And so I was watching the news every day. And then I think it was Stanford or Harvard was the first school to shut down. And I was like, shit, we've got probably a week, maybe two if we're lucky. And then all the schools are going to shut down. And so we were already hosting virtual classrooms for many schools in North America, but it was very small, because they were at physical classrooms. So we had 2.5 weeks, and I can remember going into the meeting room and writing down on the board what the number of servers we thought we would need in each of our regions. And to date, at that point, we were just doing physical servers. We would lease them, get a 2-year contract, set them up, install, and it was a leisurely process. So something that took 4 hours, we had to get it down to 4 minutes. And so for 2.5 weeks, it was all hands on deck, trying to figure out how to automate this process that we were doing manually. And we just made it. So on the Monday, where 2.5 weeks later, we saw an 10 times increase in our hosting environment, we have the server capacity ready. We were literally putting blocks of 10 servers online every hour as the capacity increased. And we were able to handle the next day and the next day. And over the next couple of weeks and months, we scaled. We scaled to where we were 60 times the capacity we were like a few months before. And to the credit of everybody in the team, we were able to pull it off. We literally were changing the engines of the plane in air and made sure that we never crashed. There were some funny things that happened along the way. Like we had some hard-coded number in our system as to the absolute highest number of concurrent sessions we thought we'd be running. And one day, the system stopped working for starting any new meetings. And we're like, what's going on? It took us an hour to figure out that we had hard-coded some crazy large number that we actually had hit. And so we just changed that number, and we were able to start more classes. And we're like, okay, that was weird. But those first few months were really intense. But
so if you look back now 18 months, like how many different student sessions have you hosted? How many teachers have you hosted? How many countries have received the benefit of BigBlueButton?
So we're localized. We were localized probably into 15, 20 languages. We're now localized into 55 languages. So people around the world want to set up their own BigBlueButton server. They sent us a localization string. We incorporated it in the product. We released a new build. We've had probably, I think the last thing was like 2 billion minutes in one of our regions, 2 billion minutes of online classes, which is insane. The number of, I don't have off the top of my head the number of students and the number of teachers, but that is hundreds of millions of classes that have gone on in our systems. And that's just the ones we host. Like we don't have this, we're not factoring in like the Baden-Württembergs of the world or other countries in the world that have gone big on using BigBlueButton. So, you know, I always think that we still have work to do to make it, but in some ways we did. And look, it was completely by fluke. We did not start this project 13 years ago thinking, let's queue it all up. So when the pandemic hits, we'll be ready to go. We just thought it was going to be another week. And then the pandemic came. The challenge was, could we respond? We did. Because we were open source, people around the world were using this and like starting to send us more and more feedback, more and more fixes. They're called pull requests. The project iterated faster and faster. So there was a period of time, I think every 2 to 4 weeks, we were releasing new updates to the product. And now it's settled down again. It was like the growth, the stabilization, and now we're kind of optimizing. And when I even look at what's coming out, like the capabilities we have, like the learning dashboard and other things, the product is getting faster and better and better. And I will tell you that an argument could be made like, well, why would you do this as open source? There's lots of commercial products out there. When we started this company, there were very few commercial products for online learning. I mean, there was about 150, I found a list, there was about 150 commercial web conferencing systems. There was very few for online learning, and there was only one other, which went away, that was open source. So we were in a market where we were pretty much the only open source option in a growing market. I didn't know how much it was going to grow at the time. And then the challenge was, okay, if we could build this out that we actually provided something that could be used, you know, it allowed teachers and students to go online, then we had an opportunity to create a worldwide community, which we did, that people could leverage when they needed to put their classes online, which they did, and that people, other developers, teachers, educators, commercial companies around the world the incentives are all there in open source. You can build on top of it, and if you contribute back to it, you make it better for everybody else. And if everybody else does that, then things just happen faster and faster. So there are features in our product like background blur that's coming out. I know most projects have it, but we have it now in the version coming out. It was actually contributed by a company in Germany. They did all the work. We pulled it in, and they told us, we want this in the product so that when we take the next release, it's already there, and we'll support it for you. And we're like, absolutely. And so there's examples around of that where we've been able to leverage the contributions of others, and it's just happening faster and faster. So pre-COVID, things were kind of cooking along. COVID was a super intense time where it was an existential threat to us. Could we scale or not? Because if we didn't, the world would just move on. We did, and we managed to solve the problem that we set out to solve, in that we would create something that would enable a school anywhere in the world to set up a BigBlueButton server and provide their students access to teachers online over the web in a way that deeply integrated with their LMS, allowed the teacher lots of ways to engage the students for pedagogical reasons, and gave them analytics in terms of what was going on so they could improve how they teach. And we built that out, and we're growing because of it, but the project itself has grown, far more than Blindside Networks.
Do you know what's amazing? You're the third entrepreneur I've spoken to that credits COVID as having broken open the potential of their business. And there's a suggestion that basically you need social or structural change to really create the environment for rapid innovation. And I can't help but think that, prior to COVID, there were businesses like Coursera. There was, universities were offering online learning. Coursera offers, courses. And again, there was a reasonable level of adoption. But I think what's happened in the last 18 months is the way that we now conduct business. And I think that the acceptance that you can reach every corner of the globe through this device, whether it's a laptop or whether it's a mobile device, to deliver learning, education, I think it's been accepted that is possible. But there's a gap. There is a gap because we've got a generation of teachers that don't necessarily understand, how to use the technology. And you've got, uneven levels of technology adoption or availability on the part of the end user. So I'm curious, what do you think is the big opportunity over the next 5 years, and what is it going to take to get there?
So it is. I think it's the same vision, or the reason we created this company and open sourced our core product for virtual classrooms, only accelerated. The world is moving online. It's accelerating faster and faster. And COVID was a forcing factor. Like, it wasn't optional to move online. The schools had to move online. For better or for worse, every teacher has taught online if they were at a school that the students couldn't reach, and they had the means to reach the students over the web. And all the students have had experience. And look, I will say, this is not the ideal, right? It was really rough. A lot of teachers struggled, a lot of students struggled. And we believe that the real opportunity is to take a hard look at where those struggles were and keep aligning the product to what the teacher's trying to do and what the student's trying to achieve. And when you look at the world of online teaching, if you just say, I just use video conferencing for that, that's not well suited. There's no pedagogy built into video conferencing. There's no awareness of what the purpose is of the session. It's to teach and learn. It's not to just do tasks. Not like a company, like, how's your project today, Stan? It's to teach, and the teacher's role is very much different than that of a manager. Like, they're a coach. They're a mentor. They're trying to impart knowledge and understand where each student is in the learning process and get them to the next stage. And they care about the students. So the environment for online teaching is far different than video conferencing. You need a baseline of audio, video, slides, chat, and that. But if that was all it is, and then if someone told me that, okay, the state of the art of video conferencing today is all you need, there's nothing left to do, it's perfect for online learning, I don't think you'll find many teachers agree with that. I think that a lot of teachers would be frustrated with what they've had to go through. And I think deep down they would realize that, okay, teaching online has a place. It is not meant to replace physical, but there are advantages of teaching online. Like, you can reach students anywhere in the world. The students can connect from any device. You can have individual moments with students while you're at the same time with the class. You can switch your context so quickly in an online class, which you may not be able to do in a live class. And it's recorded for later on viewing. There's multiple opportunities around improving the experience for teachers and students online that have not yet been realized. And so I would argue there's nothing to stop Google and Microsoft and Teams and Zoom from doing that. And they are. They've all come into the market and they said, hey, let's use our software. But I believe that if you continue to focus on the needs of the teachers and students, and you mix that with an open source project that is adopted around the world, localized in 55 languages, with over 100 developers that have contributed to it, and that pace is only increasing, that I think we can create the world's best and continue to create the world's best online virtual classroom, bar none. And because we're focused about it, we're passionate about it, we have a community of world around it, and we've demonstrated that in the most worst possible stress case, let's just turn off all the classrooms and see what happens. BigBlueButton was there for universities and colleges and K-12 and companies around the world that they could reach students that might not otherwise reached. So at the end of the day, that's what inspires me and the people in the project, and that we know that we're offering a social benefit around the world. And at this time, Rob, the world and the people around the world need all the help they can get.
That's true.
I like to think that there's a young girl in Afghanistan that's taking a class online, and they're doing it through BigBlueButton, and if they otherwise might not have. And if we can provide one student that type of experience, we can do it for every student in the world.
Well, my friend, that is a great way to end this. I just want to say thank you again. I find the entire story and your intention with BigBlueButton and Blindside Networks inspiring. And I hope, what's interesting ultimately is the fact that you were one person, you saw an opportunity, and you've, as you said, in the last 18 months, there have been millions of students who have benefited from the use of your product. And that was a journey that began with an idea. And today it's helping change the world in small and large ways. So I just want to say thank you very much, Fred. I really appreciate it, and I know others will as well.
Thanks, Rob, for the chance to share it.
Thank you so much for sticking to the end of our interview with Fred Dixon, CEO of Blindside Networks and co-founder of BigBlueButton. I hope this interview opens your eyes to the potential of online learning, despite the flack it receives in the media, and rightly so sometimes. It's not a perfect science, but Fred and like-minded people are chisels helping to sculpt and shape a more effective online learning environment every single day. And remember, if you enjoyed our interview, please remember to hit like and subscribe for more great stories of inspired entrepreneurs. We hope to see you next time.